Need I say more? With the recent uproar against boomers from social media, society has reached a seemingly increasingly larger divide between generations. Assumptions about the characteristics and actions of a certain group of people who happen to be of the same age range have become much more prominent and noticeable. Generations have been a societal occurrence ever since the propositions by individuals such as Karl Mannheim, who basically proposed generations as early as the 1900s, but have become much more specific and damaging as they are continued to be pushed onto society. As these stereotypes have become more popular, they have evolved with time. Boomers, the term used to describe individuals born in 1944 to 1964, originally coined in 1992, continue to be characterized as strict, nagging, annoying, and younger generations tend to be characterized as spoiled, lazy, and unmotivated. This leads to the question, to what extent are generational stereotypes limiting society in the U.S.? Collectively, we have determined the inadequacy of generalizing generations, as these generational divides have now reached the point that they are limiting progress in the U.S.
To further understand this issue, we must examine the word stereotype. A stereotype is an assumption about a group of people. This can be based on their gender, race, nationality, or in this case, their age. To expand on the previous definition, we can look at a quote from Magda and Brownstein, two PhD holders in psychology, which explain that stereotypes are crude, unconscious, and therefore not morally objective. Stereotypes do not directly affect our actions. Instead, they take the form of implicit bias. Implicit bias takes place in a system in our brains called System 1, which takes our stereotypes and allows us to fill in the blanks to act appropriately for certain people. For example, you would act very differently to these two people. It all depends on a person's personal background and experiences. This can also be applied to generational stereotypes. As seen in this picture, this is a stereotypical view of each generation. Taking an entire generation down to two individuals seems hardly objective. Individuals may be part of the same group and share the same characteristics, but there are no two identical people. Despite not being the same, generations do share similarities. As stated by Anne Freeman, it's a rite of passage for each generation to get bashed by the media. It started with boomers being called rebels, threatening to destroy all good, and now millennials are called not really adults and are being blamed for societal downfall. In reality, both generations have made strides in reforming previous generations' faults. Overall, it will be better to break the link between groups of people and general stereotypes and recognize the importance of individuality. After all, there are racist millennials and tech-savvy boomers in the world completely diverting their stereotypes.
As Nikki previously stated, each generation has a rite of passage of getting bashed by the media. Recently, there was a black young couple in Oklahoma who lived in their home in a primarily white neighborhood, and they were actually told to leave their house and get out of the city. Immediately, the media and many others assumed that this was done by an old white boomer couple, but after reporters and police looked into it, they not only found that this was done by a millennial couple, but they also looked into the records and found that police had reported the highest number of anti-black hate crimes since 2000, from 2010 to 2016. This not only can prove that racism cannot be blamed on one generation, but it proves that racism has greatly increased over the past few years. To understand why this is happening and why boomers are not the only racist ones, we also need to look at our past and look at the fact that boomers were actually some of the first ones to fight against racism, and that there are still racist millennials. Another touchy topic between the different generations is feminism. Feminism means something different to each generation. For example, to flappers in the 1920s to teens now, there has been a huge gap, and there are barely any similarities between the two different types of feminists. So far today, radical feminists are the only ones being shown. These are typically millennials, and this is leading to terms being coined such as feminazi, which is greatly harming the community. This is causing generations to look down on each other and then causing them to be less likely to work together towards gender equality. As seen by this graph, there are 20% of millennials identifying as LGBTQ, with only 7% of boomers identifying as LGBTQ. This is a 13% difference, which is obviously very high. Clearly, more millennials are going to identify as LGBTQ because they feel free to be who they are and out. We need to understand, though, that boomers were actually the ones to start this trend of increasing numbers of LGBTQ youth, because they were the first ones to fight for their rights, and they were the trailblazers for people to feel comfortable and be out who they are. Overall, people need to communicate and understand that there are more liberal baby boomers and more conservative millennials. We also need to make sure that the media is showing all different sides of each generation so everyone can be understood.
specific works and studies have been referenced for years regarding generational theory and functionality. These philosophies and propositions have truly affected human norms as a whole without recognition. In 1928, sociologist Karl Mannheim, in his piece The Problem of Generations, explains how generations differ from one another. In this, he breaks down the complexity in his overall understanding of the generational gap, and his work is extremely controversial. He indicates different generations are distinct and have clear differences from those of other age ranges. He proposes a theory in which all generations are distinct due to the fact that they experience similar events during childhood and adolescence. He states how generations follow generations in a continuous and never-ending loop. These distinctions vary on the progressive realities of this time period, technological advancements, or tragedy, such as war. On the other hand, Rebecca Onion, a journalist for Aeon magazine, emphasizes the way in which individuals like Mannheim were incorrect in their evaluation of how they perceive generation. She states, generation theory is a simplistic way of thinking about the relationship between individuals, society, and history. This is a common criticism given to those who theorize of generational theory. Basically, the generalizations of people allow for vague assumptions. In believing in such broad generalizations, such as the theory of generations, humans begin to think of themselves as in the box and the same as everybody else. These stereotypes not only cause simplistic thinking, but also helps the progressive rates of society. Still considering the original works and discoveries by Mannheim, others determined the effectiveness of these stereotypes and generalization from a different perspective. In a paper written by Cambridge professors, they propose that stereotypes are taken in a negative connotation, differing from how they were originated. They say that they could help assist in the progressive ideals of society. Although, everything considered, generations should not be categorized by specific traits and beliefs. Rather, instead of making such broad assumptions of certain groups of people, such as personality, character, and even more personal beliefs, such as religion and political stance, they should not be categorized in such a way.
Continuing with this idea of vague assumptions, one would typically assume that a single political party would have members of similar political leaning. However, as seen with the current Democratic primary, with the race primarily being between Sanders and Buttigieg, Buttigieg is currently, despite the fact that he's one of the youngest candidates of all time, is being heavily supported by older baby boomers who are considered to be more moderate, while Sanders, who's much older than Buttigieg, is being supported by younger millennials. Despite the differences here, you're going to be seeing a big difference in generations, and this is just kind of going against your typical political beliefs. Another similar Democratic race can be seen in Massachusetts. As of right now, the race still hasn't happened, and I believe it will be happening this summer between Ed Markey and Joe Kennedy III. Both of them have almost identical political policies. However, seen by the quote above, Massachusetts voters are being affected by Joe Kennedy's heritage. Reminiscing about JFK, people are tending to favor him despite the fact that Ed Markey has almost 60 years of experience over Kennedy. Continuing with this, Robert Levine, he was a political journalist for over 40 years. In his article for the Modern Voice, he described an example in which politicians have to decide between education and Medicare. Basically what this is, if you're spending money to support one topic, you're going to be harming another generation that gets their help from another issue, such as if you're going to be funding education, you're going to be cutting costs for Medicare, and you're going to be doing the inverse if you're supporting Medicare. Through all of our work, implications of this would be that you would have an imbalance in political policies as politicians are working to favor specific generations. This would also cause politicians who favor different generations to have infighting with each other, meaning you would have political deadlock. And then finally with that, you would have gerrymandering as politicians work to have specific voters in specific regions that belong to generations. And finally, with all of our work combined, we have seen a study that was with the World Health Organization and Cornell University. The two of them did a study and found that education and intergenerational interaction can significantly lower intergenerational bias. So we have decided that this would be our best step forward, would be to have some sort of education system that would help with this. There would be limitations in time and cost. Cost, we don't really have much of an estimate, but we can assume that as we are adding classes that this would certainly cost a significant amount. In time, this would take years, as bias would take years to fade out. Yeah.
Okay, a couple of questions. Alexis, I'm going to start with you. Describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
Okay, so Lauren actually brought up, the idea of toxic third wave feminism and LGBT, and that made us think differently about our conclusion because we talked about how we should stop generalizing and assuming, that all baby boomers, or that all Generation Z are these toxic third wave feminists, Nazi, as she stated, and that boomers are less progressive.
Thank you. Nikki, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
For my individual research, I focused more on just breaking down the stereotypes. I didn't necessarily look into like the specific solution of like how to do that. So I feel like combining the rest of our research, it was better to talk about education and having the generations interact, which I kind of left that out. I more summarized at the end of my IRR, like my findings on the scientific aspect behind stereotypes.
Okay. Lauren, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem that the group identified?
I would say definitely Jack, because Jack, with the political and historical lens, he could definitely pinpoint specific issues such as the Massachusetts primary, and then also the Democratic Party issues with Pete Buttigieg, and then also Bernie Sanders. I think it just overall applied stuff to a more modern topic. Alexis's definitely did go into some more historical issues, which did help my understanding, and Nikki's gave me more of a basis of what happened, but I definitely think Jack, with his overall political examples with Medicare and education, definitely gave a good example for me to understand the entire problem.
Thank you. And Jack, give one specific way that your thinking changed as a result of learning about Alexis's findings.
My way my thinking changed primarily with she did include a bit about how generations are formed through similar experiences. While when I was doing research, I did delve slightly into this, where just the general idea of it was,